This podcast is brought to you by Craft Beer and Brewing Magazine for those that love to make and drink great beer. Learn more online or subscribe at beerandbrewing.com or find us on social media at Craft Beer Brew. Welcome to the Craft Beer and Brewing Podcast. I'm your host, Jamie Bogner, co-founder and editorial director of Craft Beer and Brewing Magazine. My guest on the podcast today, it was in the news this week, Avery of Avery Brewing, Boulder, Colorado. Welcome to the podcast, Adam.
Thanks, Jamie.
Cool. Glad we could finally get this conversation. We've been talking about it for months and months and months, all through the fall. We talked about it again at Big Beers at the calibration dinner. And now it's April, and we're finally getting the conversation done. First, I want to tell you, as the brewing industry's premier choice for glycol chilling, G&D Chillers has set the standard on quality, service, and dedication to their customers' craft for 25 years. G&D has led the way on custom, innovative solutions that match brewing customers' immediate and future needs. Thinking outside the box, whether it's a simple relocation of the utility connections for a complex buildup or ground-level design and engineering, G&D is ready to meet the challenge. Contact G&D Chillers today for your chiller sizing needs at 1-800-555-0973 or reach out online at gdchillers.com. Also, the founders of SS Brewtech launched with a very clear goal to advance brewing equipment design, performance, and quality to the very highest standards in the industry. With a team that draws upon strong functional backgrounds in brewing science, mechanical engineering, industrial design, supply chain, and manufacturing, SS Brewtech has the people and skill sets you need and expect from your supplier of professional brewing equipment. Head over to ssbrewtech.com for more information on their brew houses and brewing gear. Cool. Before we start our conversation, I also want to mention next week on the podcast, we have a crazy podcast tap takeover. I guess it's a podcast takeover where Neil Fisher of WeldWorks Brewing and Corey King of Side Project Brewing are just going to take over, lead the conversation amongst themselves. I'm going to back right out of it and just let them go for it. So that'll be a fun one. And we'll also be celebrating the 5th anniversary next week of Craft Beer and Brewing Magazine and Craft Beer and Brewing the Business. We had our launch party April 8th at CBC in Denver in 2014 as we had the first issue of the magazine out. And so, hey, next week is that 5-year anniversary. Kind of fun. We're excited about it. If you are coming to CBC, come out and see us. We actually have a trade show booth this year, booth 20089. We'll be manning it. We'll be hosting some podcasts out of the booth at CBC right there on the floor. Speaking of the podcast, we also had another milestone on it this week. We hit our 1 millionth download of the podcast. So somehow or another, people have downloaded our podcast over 1 million times. Kind of fun, kind of cool. I don't know what that means. Maybe it's just something arbitrary. But here we are, 1 million downloads later, people are listening and caring about what we do. And then the other news for us this week is that if you are a subscriber to Beer Advocate Magazine, you have become a subscriber to Craft Beer and Brewing Magazine. They reached a point where they decided they needed to wind down their magazine. And, so we started talking with them about how we can make sure that process went smoothly for their subscribers. And so we want to welcome to Craft Beer and Brewing Magazine the tens of thousands of Beer Advocate subscribers who have now become Craft Beer and Brewing subscribers. I think it's great in this industry of craft beer to be able to work together, help each other out, help businesses focus on what they need to focus on. They felt they needed to focus on events and the website. We, are heavy into our publishing strategy, and it's been good for us. And so, hey, it worked out well, and here we are. So that's our news. Now let's talk about you, Adam.
Okay. First, congrats on those milestones. I want to ask you, I'll ask the first question of the interview. You're interviewing me.
You can ask. Go ahead.
Which milestone is more important to you, that 1 million downloads or that 5 years of doing business?
I think things like 1 million downloads are pretty arbitrary. But when we look back at it, we started this business and we came out of another media business. My partner, John Bolton and I, who founded the business, who you met actually as we were talking to you for our very first issue of Craft Beer and Brewing. We had Adam Avery's cellaring tips in that very first issue. And I remember...
And you're still in business.
We're still
amazing.
Here.
You really turned that into something.
But, speaking of that, I appreciate the fact that you would even take our call and give us the time, and you did, and we tasted some historic vintage beers and some really old fun stuff at the old brewery in the alley. And here we were, young upstarts, getting into beer media, and you paid attention to us, and I appreciate that. Here we are, 5 years later. We're here and still around, and we've tried to stay focused with what we do on media that helps people get better at what they like to do.
Congrats.
Thanks. Hopefully, we'll be around 5, 10, 15 more years. People support us and subscribe to Craft Beer and Brewing Magazine and keep listening to the podcast, and we'll be able to keep doing what we do.
Hey, man, craft beer needs you. Keep doing the good job.
We're all in this together.
Yep.
So you're in the news this week, Adam,
Yep.
with another big business move. Tell me a little bit about how that arc has played out over the last 2 years. For those that aren't familiar, you've sold an additional stake in the business to founders and Mahu San Miguel, who already had a 30% investment in the business, and now they control a majority stake of the business. Tell me a little bit about how you got to that point, and and why you felt the need to bring on some partners like that to align with in today's craft beer market.
Well, I think, what has it been? It's probably about 3 years ago. We decided, Dad and I, that looking for some partners. I mean, we had a lot of people calling us.
Sure.
And all of a sudden, we've always said, no, we're good. We like doing what we're doing.
And this is happening to breweries of all scale. I mean, I know breweries with 3,000-5,000 barrel breweries where there's always somebody sniffing around that wants to at least talk about something to have to do with acquisition, merger, et cetera. And so you got pretty good at ignoring, I guess, some of those approaches.
Well, I did for a time, and then it got to a point where it's like, you think, well, maybe, in the future it might be, something to think about. And so, we got some people who could kind of put some people in front of us. And, we talked to a lot of different people, big breweries, private equity, small family trust, things like that. I mean, we talked to a lot of people who are looking to invest in, what is a growing, emerging, industry.
Right.
And so, we took our time, and we didn't go into it thinking that the end game was going to be having a partner.
Right.
But it was like, hey, if the perfect partner showed up on our doorstep, and we got along, and we had the right conversations, and we had the right kind of synergies, the way the way that we think about life and the way that we think about business, then why not? And so we talked to a lot of people, and luckily the Mao folk showed up, and they liked us, and we liked them, and we dated for almost a year, I would say. Because there's a lot of information to be shared, and you want to make sure that you're getting married to the right person, and you want to do it one time, you want to do it the right way. And so we took our time, and so far it's been an unbelievable ride.
So there are a few reasons that the brewers, and now you've come out of this and you've been in this game for decades.
26 years.
26 years. You got started in the 90s, and you've just kind of pushed through, and so you've seen craft beer go through a lot of different phases. You started pretty small, and you've worked your way up to where you are now, and you've been in the trenches for a really long time. But for that generation of brewers that got started 26, 27, 30 years ago, we're starting to see a lot of questions about longevity, but transition strategy and how businesses get maintained over the long run. 26 years into any business, for any entrepreneur that's starting something up from the ground, gets to be, you're in the same business for 26 years. You want to do something new. You don't want to necessarily do this until you die. You want to be able to enjoy some of the work that you've done. How does that feed into, you also don't necessarily have, a next generation of family to hand a business down to that's going to take over for you. So how does that thinking about how this business continues on into the future for the next 26 years figure into some of your thought around finding some partners to work with on this?
Well, I mean, certainly I don't have kids, and I don't plan on having kids, so there isn't that next generation. So yeah, I mean, part of this,
ESOPs are not necessarily the golden solution now that some of the growth rates have decreased in craft beer.
I wouldn't say that they do or don't work because I've never done them.
Right.
I know they're complicated, and seemingly on the outside they look good. But there are pressures under the business by doing an ESOP. So,
right.
I mean, my thing is I don't have kids or whatever, but I have 155 guys and gals that I come to work with every day. And, I feel a responsibility to them and their families. Sure. And so when you look at the longevity, you look where the business is going, not just our business, but the industry in general, craft beer isn't a small business anymore. It's not like the way that when I started, it was, I don't know how many breweries there were when we started, 400 or 500 or something like that, but it's definitely a different business now, and it's only going to get bigger, and we all see that. Yeah. And so, we want to be competitive, and we want to give, our employees and coworkers every opportunity to be successful. And so finding the right business partner, the people who are on the same kind of arc as we are, was really important. So the fact that, Mao has been brewing beer for 128 years was, certainly that was checking one of the big boxes, which is passion for, like-minded passion, which is beer, because we're beer first, the rest will follow. That's our credo. And they're like-minded in that way. It's like, we're not trying to make any other things, or, we're not diving into, other, products and stuff. We're about beer. That's what we make.
Yeah. And, it's not uncommon in the market right now, where we are seeing, you could look at everything from, Duvel and Boulevard and Firestone Walker, Omegon, Artisanal Beverage Ventures, Southern Tier, and a 6 Point Victory. Now Ninkasi, is apparently pursuing the same kind of strategy. There seems to be among, this kind of larger scale, 50,000 barrel plus, regional brewery, an understanding and a need for more efficiency in order to be able to be profitable and be able to, produce the kinds of things you want and sell it, to the folks that are interested in that, rather than all of these businesses at this scale operating their own separate sales staff, their own separate, distributor relationships and whatnot. But it even, I even see that on the smaller scale. You see a lot of small self-distributing breweries that are operating their own trucks when, if they were partnering with other self-distributing breweries, could be much more efficient in managing costs around that kind of thing. That is a big issue, I think, in craft beer right now, is focusing on the kinds of efficiencies that allow craft beer to be profitable, which is producing the highest quality product, but at a price that a consumer is willing to pay. And when you find those efficiencies, you can actually spend more time focusing on that quality than you are focusing on how to sell it to those people.
Or concentrating on telling your story as well. Yeah. And one of the other things that that you mentioned, a lot of the synergies that you can have, but also just producing beer, as far as for other breweries, and I think that's going to be a model going forward as well, for sure. Yeah, having more of a brewing hub, and having different breweries brewing out of it. I think you're going to see a lot more of that as well.
Why?
Because then you can have you can maintain a quality standard that the other breweries, smaller breweries, might not be able to attain. You can
brewing more on the same amount of equipment allows you to invest more heavily in the elements that let you produce that quality, but it also puts it closer to the consumer and shorten shipping times and
all of that and the above. Yeah, for sure.
But that raises an interesting question. That there's this idea of quote unquote authenticity, driving the craft beer world. And, for a lot of folks now, breweries like Oscar Blues and Canarchy have kind of, helped consumers move past that notion, that somehow the beer isn't that brand if it's not made in this one specific place by these, specific people. I look at it from our perspective as a magazine. Like, we don't run the printing presses that print our magazine, but is it still our magazine? Of course it is, because it's our creativity and our direction and our preparation and producing that so that the press can produce it, to the standard that we expect them to, and it's our magazine's result. But within craft beer, there has historically been a little bit of a different understanding about that.
As far as being authentic right. in the way you're brewing the beer, well, I think that people are going to get over that, and I think that what it's going to come down to is the same thing that you're looking for is, you want a quality magazine, and like if you had to buy a printing press to make that happen, would you be more authentic if you had actually run that printing press yourself and had a lesser quality, outcome? And I think that that's what our industry is moving towards, is the understanding that quality equals quality, right? I mean, local doesn't equal quality, small doesn't equal quality, big doesn't equal quality. I mean, quality is quality. I mean, like, it's either the beer is top notch and tastes the same every time. So A lot of breweries can produce, high quality beer occasionally, and a lot of time, but, producing high quality beer 100% of the time or 99% of the time or whatever you're shooting for is ultra difficult, because you need to have the equipment. You need to have, then really what you need to have is the expertise of the people who know how to run that equipment. And those are all expensive propositions. And so being able to solidify those kind of resources into, one hub or two hubs or three hubs and then brew out of them, I think that that's the future. I think that that's the way that our industry will grow. For instance, I just see it as smaller breweries, instead of taking the leap that Dad and I took or whoever has taken and to build a big brewery, I think that more are going to be looking at it and saying, hey, either I'm going to stay ultra small and produce beer for a very regional, a city, a couple city blocks or whatnot, or hey, if I want to expand, instead of like putting my neck on the line or going out to the bank or going to find investors, maybe it's easier just to go find some capacity at a top quality brewery that you trust, and they can brew some beer for us. And do you lose authenticity there? If your goal in brewing beer is to make the best beer that you possibly can, and quality is your job one, shouldn't you be brewing your beer on systems that can provide that for you and provide it for your customers and your fans?
That makes sense. And that capacity question, I think, is one that, craft beer has to wrestle with at some level. Every year at CBC, Bart Watson and Paul Gatska, talk about the ongoing, growth in capacity and the gap, in capacity between what brewers can produce and what they do produce. I think last year that gap was something like 40%, that craft brewers had the capacity, they had invested the capital in brew house equipment to brew 40% more beer than they were actually producing. Well, that's highly inefficient from an economic standpoint, to have that much excess capacity. And yet, still brewers are spending hundreds of thousands or millions and millions of dollars on more brewing capacity, despite the fact that much capacity exists out there in the market. It sounds like what you're saying, would eventually, potentially lead to a much more efficient use of existing capacity if more brewers took advantage of using that capacity at other breweries rather than simply building out new equipment themselves.
I couldn't have said it better. It's exactly what it is. And I'm that guy as well. We have excess capacity here as well. I think a lot of people, especially, 5 years ago, like when we started this project, there was a lot of blue sky. There still is a ton of blue sky out there. But the market has definitely changed, in the last 5 years. Hell, in the last 2 years, it's changed quite a bit. And so certainly there's a ton of capacity out there. There's no doubt about it. Especially in, I think medium-sized breweries to, larger breweries. And so there are opportunities. I think there are opportunities on both ends. Like there's opportunities like I was talking about for the small brewer to be able to capitalize some existing area capacity, and then obviously for the producer themselves, obviously filling in that capacity is good for the bottom line.
Let's talk about that blue sky in a moment. But first, great beers are made from select ingredients. With BSG, you'll bring the world to your brew house with an unparalleled and diverse selection of ingredients from across the globe to just down the road. Their dedicated customer service team and industry experience provides you with the assistance you need every step of the way. Let BSG be your supplier of choice for products essential to making great artisanal beverages so you can stay focused on your craft. For more information, visit them at bsgcraftbrewing.com or call 1-800-374-2739. Also, this episode is brought to you by craftbeer.com, whose mission is to tell the stories behind America's small and independent breweries and the cities and businesses that support them. So you mentioned blue sky. I think there's this narrative out there in beer right now that, even though we're seeing 3 to 4% growth in volume and even more revenue growth, that somehow the sky is falling. And, so to come out and say that you do think that there is blue sky and other potential growth ahead, sounds interesting to me. Where do you think that is? And, how do you as a business, look for that?
To why is there blue sky? I mean, this business, I mean, I've been in it for 26 years and there's been big ups,
Yeah.
there's been some big downs, and there's been some flatness, and there's been, so, I mean, it's just like, I mean, it's just a cycle, you know,
Yeah.
and like, so, but I truly believe that the people that I know in the industry, and pretty much, well, I think that probably a lot of people that I don't know are in it for the right reasons. I mean, we're really passionate about what we do. I think that, you know, people's love for beer is, you know, you can see it, you know, you can look at all the Nelson reports and blah, blah, blah. But like, I mean, I don't think beer is going anywhere. I mean, it's not going to disappear. You know, I think it's up to us to make sure that we are an energized industry, the beer industry in general, to make sure that people still, you know, we want people to drink beer, right? I mean, we need to pay the bills and we need to, you know, make beer. So I just see it as a cycle. And I think that we'll come out of this, you know, stronger than we were before for the reasons that we were just talking about. I think that the industry is definitely evolving. And, I don't have the roadmap. My partner, Mal, we don't have a roadmap. It's a super fluid industry. And especially we can see that in the last, you know, few years. Who would have thought that there would be 7,500 breweries? You know, if you told me that, you know, 5 years ago, would I have built this brewery? I don't know. You know, I can't go back in time, Jamie, but I had, you know, my crystal ball was, you know, cloudy on that aspect. So no, I think that, the quality, I mean, so what's going to happen is that, you know, I still believe that quality wins out. I think that overall that, the quality of the beer in America will continue to rise. And so if you put out a quality product, super flavorful, and then this local aspect to things, I think that there's a ton of blue sky. There's still a lot of, you know, quote, yellow fizzy beer to eat into. And
is that battle though really salient these days? You know, I mean, it hasn't craft beer pretty much already won all of that battle that was out there, and isn't it now really just about how you can create some interest and excitement or consistency with consumers? I mean, it seems like aligning in that kind of us versus them mentality is kind of run its course.
Well, I don't think it's us versus them necessarily.
And I say that because now you're aligned with someone who does make, you know, some standard lagers and sells them in large volumes through Europe. And so, you know, I mean, it's not the...
But interestingly enough, you know, they've got a big push in at their facilities to make barrel-aged beers,
really?
To make, you know, double box, to make IPAs and things like that. So while it's not us versus them, because we need beer to do well, you know, overall for all of us to, you know, to do well, I think that there's a push towards making more flavorful things,
right.
More things that have more depth to them. And believe me, I drink my fair share of, you know, quote, you know, yellow fizzy beer. I mean, I love those things. But I think that we can introduce more flavorful beers to a broader swash of people, and hopefully they'll come on to, you know, the craft side of things into just, you know, a bigger, more flavorful stuff.
That does make sense. If you know the stats hold true, where the Brewers Association's stats of 13% of beer, you know, volume right now is craft beer. You're right. That's a lot more people that you know, could be exposed to flavorful beer and, you know, some adventure there. I think that's, you know, to me where some of the danger in this doom and gloom narrative really lies, and that you know, there are plenty of folks that I mean, people have been predicting the demise of craft beer since there were 2,000 breweries in 2012 or 2013. Like, you know, this the bubble is going to burst thing has been out there for at least the last 5 years. It was out there when we started our magazine, and you know, 5,000 breweries ago. Still hasn't burst, and I think you know, and so I find it interesting to see that you know, that narrative still, you know, finds fans and support out there, even though the craft beer has defied those naysayers over and over again. Even with the latest, you know, Brewers Association numbers, the closures of breweries were actually slower this year, or in 2018, than they should have been, had the same statistical number held true that has held true for the last 5 years. And I've looked at those numbers. It's been a 5% closure rate. Like, the number of breweries that close every year has been at about 5% of the overall brewery number, and it's been 5% for the last 5 years in a row. Somehow it dropped to 3% in 2018. And so I expected at least 275 breweries to close, and I think the number was something like 219. It seems to be defying all of that doom and gloom logic, but for good. That, if consumers were to somehow glom onto that craft beer is falling apart narrative that some people want to put out there, then it would be a less interesting or exciting category for today's drinkers.
Yeah, I mean,
sorry, I was just soapboxing.
No. So that's on the kind of the negative bottom end, and then I would say that the reason why I feel like craft beer is here to stay, or however you want to define, what we're doing here, is
how do you define it?
Well, no. First,
okay.
Can you come back to that one, because I will answer that, but. Okay. What I see it as is like, think of all the people who are this big money that's coming into it. So like you talk about like, well, is it us versus them? And then you got ABI, buying up some really nice craft breweries, and building a division at the high end on that side. Miller Coors doing the same thing. And then you've got a ton of private equity, going in big. And I think that's, you're going to see I don't have a crystal ball, but if I were to if I had my, I would think that it's going to continue to happen, because there are a lot of great breweries, a lot of good business models out there. People who want to invest, they want to invest in things that actually work. And so when you talk about a brewery that's 26 years old like we are, or breweries that are 10 or even 15 years old who are doing well, I mean, people are interested in that. People who have money are like, we need a place to invest our money, and why not in craft beer? Because I mean, I think it's a fairly proven commodity. I'm not trying to devalue it by calling it commodity, but like when you start thinking about the people who are putting money into craft beer, they're not necessarily guys like me or you who are home brewers and doing that. They're money people. Like, I mean, they're right. in it to make money for other people, right? And so when you start seeing that kind of money coming into our industry, some people would say, well, that's a bad thing. And I would say, well, maybe, if you're thinking about, craft and authenticity and all those things, but if you're looking at for longevity and survival, it's a good thing. It's a good thing. It's for, we're growing up, as a business. I mean, I started as a home brewer. I would never have thought I'd be sitting in this brewery that we're in, even up until like 6 or 7 years ago, I would have called you crazy if you said I was going to have a brewery like this. But yet, here I sit, and, it's not all the work that I did. It's guys like you running a magazine. It's, craft beer fans and all these things that have to happen in order for us to, to be successful. And then sometimes as an owner, you have to say, well, what's the next step? How can we continue this success stream, and build a better life for, our employees and make better beer. I mean, that's what it comes down to. Is we built this brewery. We took on a lot of debt. People are like, why'd you do it? To make more beer? And I'm like, no, hopefully that's the outcome, but we really built a brewery to make a better quality beer. And that's why we have all the equipment that we have here. So we're trying to pay it off.
So, and I think another thing that gets lost both to beer fans and to, to other folks that aspire to launch their own breweries is just how stressful that shit can be for you. Like, here you are and you took on over $20 million in debt to build out this plant, because to be perfectly honest, debt is really cheap these days. The money is cheap. And so taking that out, paying interest on it, it's pretty manageable as long as you're growing and can continue to, pay that debt off. But that had to give you some sleepless nights there in that process, looking at what you were committing to in the future and just how much stress that may have created for you.
No doubt about it. I mean, Dad and I have been in, 100% since day one. So, I mean, we've always just like funneled back, any money we made always went back into the brewery, even back in the alley. I mean, while the alley wasn't beautiful, we definitely, we invested, everything that we had basically ever made into it. And so Dad and I are always, we've always been all in. So we weren't necessarily worried about that. The number got bigger. I mean, it became kind of like, it felt like monopoly money, at some point. But then, I mean, obviously, you have a new partner, and that partner is your bank, and, they want to get paid, every month. There's definitely a lot of stress involved with it. Luckily, we can sit at the bar and de-stress over, our product.
Sure. Do you ever look back at it now and think this wasn't the plan for this, and how did I get here?
every single day. I mean, I just, we're writing basically I tell my guys, we're writing a novel, and man, I don't even know. I used to know probably what was going to be in the next chapter, and now, it feels like, we're writing a page and we're not sure what at the end of that page is going to look like, in a good way, because it's really, really, there's so many opportunities out there for us, especially with, our new partners. And then, actually having Mike and Dave, from Founders being involved as well is very, very, it's crazy, it's crazy. So like, to answer your question, no, I would say that, if you'd asked me, especially like, 1993, would I be sitting here doing this interview with you? No way. Like I said, even 6 or 7 years ago, would I be sitting in a brewery like this? No way. It all happened really, really fast, and of course it's 26 years, but man, it really does seem like, it's like a blink of the eye. And, and here I am sitting here just going, oh my God, I have some new great partners. My beer has never tasted better. I'm stoked.
One of my favorite things that Steve Jobs ever said was what defined Apple was not the products that they make, but it's the products that they didn't make. That it was that editorial process of deciding what the right opportunities were and going after those opportunities that they could execute really well on, and also create something unique in the marketplace and change the market, define the company. For you at this kind of scale, how do you evaluate by looking at all of the potentials, for innovation, for new products, for growth, and then winnow down into what makes sense for Avery as a business and how you move forward with that process of innovation that should be what Avery does?
Specifically, I got a couple of stories for you. So one is I've, for 15 years, and
I'm saying that as we're drinking a 110 calorie hazy IPA.
Right. So we could talk about that one, but two in particular. So, for 15 years, I've wanted to do an electrolyte beer, know, and, my guys in the market and everybody's just like, that's stupid, Adam, and it was, so like you're talking about like what you did, what products you did, but I think it's also about, and what I'm learning is that you might have an idea, that's way too ahead of its time, or isn't right for the time. Like making an IPA in 1996. I had my best friends wheeling bars tell me to come back, pick up the kegs because they couldn't sell the beer
with IPA.
Right. And so that was 20 years ago. Right. So, obviously now IPAs are the biggest selling, beer or style for craft beer. So, but specifically, so the electrolyte IPA, so we started making an electrolyte, IPA. And now for 20 years, like literally, so about 5 years into the brewery, I was drinking way too much. I'm probably some people would say maybe I still drink too much, but I was a kid then, so I could handle it. But so I was like, man, what would be the best thing? Because I love beer and I love the flavor of beer. I don't necessarily need the alcohol necessarily, but I was like, if I could make an IPA that was non-alcoholic, that would be awesome, because then I could have a breakfast beer. I could just have a beer whenever I wanted, instead of having, whatever, a soda or whatever. You could have an NA IPA. And so I wanted to do an NA IPA for 20 years. And so we are developing one right now with the help of our partners, Mal, because they've been making, hundreds of thousands of hectoliters of, non-alcoholic beer, which is huge in the world. I think in the world, it's like nearly 20% of the beer production in the world is non-alcoholic. Really? I think America is about 6%. So it's coming. I think, that wave is coming. And so, back to your question is like, you got to marry up your ideas with what will work. And luckily, a lot of those ideas for us in the past have worked, which is like, an IPA way back in the day. Of course, it was hard to sell an IPA in 96, but it eventually became a lot easier, right? It's pretty easy now. You can't make a beer hoppy enough now. You really can't for people. So, and then, the next wave for us was, higher alcohol and big beers, and then into barrel aging and these things. So, you try to be the tip of the spear, but at some point, you obviously you got to sell some beer as well. But I feel like we're doing a good job of staying true to like what we want to do. And so to your point, like we're drinking this, this low calorie hazy IPA, and it's a super selfish project because, I'm 52 years old and, I like to drink beer. And so I told the guys, I challenged them. I was like, I want a super aggressively hoppy beer. I don't want it to be watery. I want it to be 100 calories. And whatever alcohol content it is. But I want to drink a beer. I want it to be first and foremost a great hazy IPA that just so happens to have 100 calories.
Yeah. Are there opportunities that you haven't followed up on because they weren't the right thing for Avery as a brand?
Well, I think we've made so many beers, and we've done.
I guess that product of experimentation is like easy. You put it on, you brew once, you put it on tap. People don't like it.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right. But I think that just like I mentioned that like an NA, electrolyte, this better for you concept, which is trying to make an alcoholic product that is. I mean, you can't say it's healthy for you, but like health, I guess. Better for you. I mean, it's a great way to describe it. I think that is the next wave, and I think that we're already seeing it. There's a lot of craft breweries putting out low calorie beers.
They definitely are, and you've even seen Sierra Nevada, purchasing Sufferfest, the first acquisition that Sierra has ever made, just for that same kind of purpose, to have a better for, quote unquote better for you. I'm going to throw big air quotes around that because it's all relative, I guess. I tend to prefer my electrolytes and electrolyte drink of some sort and then my beer after that. But, I guess psychologically there is a certain, part of the market that is driven towards this kind of idea of drinking something that's better for them.
I hope so. I mean, because most every beer we've made I've been 100% behind it.
Yeah.
And so we always try to brew true to ourselves and what we're trying to accomplish. And so, that's what I said.
Yeah.
That beer in front of you right now it wouldn't be there except I'm being selfish. And I'm like, that's the beer that I want to do. I want to be able to call it out at a bar and know that I can have a couple beers and still drive, or, drink several beers and feel good the next day.
You've made some flyers on other categories of beer, which have turned out to be pretty successful for Avery, especially with barrel aged beers. I remember a few years ago you would. I used to go line up in the alley and stand in line to go buy some barrel-aged beers from Avery.
Thanks for your money, Jamie. You're part of your money you're sitting in right now.
They were delicious. Totally worth it. But I remember when you moved in here, you went from something like 250 barrels to 3,000 barrels of beer, a major, major investment in a category of beer that no one really knew if it could grow that much, or if it would just be some giant folly, to go after that. But it's proven relatively successful for you as a category, both in terms of keeping the Avery brand like exciting and also kind of setting a high end for that Avery brand.
For sure, and I think that barrel aging is the upper end of what we can do as brewers, as far as like flavor forward kind of things. And the things that you can produce in a barrel are hard to replicate coming out of steel. And like you said, it's expensive. It's hard to do. But I mean, we're passionate about it here, and it definitely helps drive us as brewers. But then also, like you're talking about out in the market, it's like, it's a great way to differentiate yourself from, the 7,500 breweries that are out there. A lot of people do barrel aging, but, can you do it in mass? And more importantly, can you do it in a super consistent way? And that's what we're pretty proud of, is to be able to put out, the same beer that tastes the same, every single time. That's hard to do.
And you've also been kind of actively working to bring the price points of those down. I noticed, up at Big Beers, you rolled out cans of some of your barrel-aged sour beer and barrel-aged coconut porter. Talk to me about that impulse to go take those beers that have been formerly, bomber beers, gold foil, silver foil, green foil wrapped, and with this kind of specialized branding, and then making those more accessible to to more consumers.
Yeah, I mean the beers were too occasional.
Yeah.
I mean I like to drink barrel aged beers all the time. And so we felt like people were like holding on to them for birthdays or like wait until somebody had to come over so they could split the 22-ounce bottle. And we want people to enjoy them every day. And so we wanted to put it into a size and a format that screams, drink me, and don't worry that, there'll be more, that's the thing. It's
we'll
like,
make more. Yeah.
Right. But that's the funny thing is that, so you ride that fine line between, people wanting the whales they can only get occasionally. But my hope and what I think what I'm betting on is that people want to have things when they want to have them, and they want to have them accessible. And they want them to be made to be consumed, So we went to a 16-ounce can for they're barrel-aged 16ers now. And so, it's to promote drinking, Jamie. It's to promote drinking.
I think that's a good thing. And I think that this, that kind of whale culture of craft beer has been an interesting and pretty useful kind of, portion of craft beer history. But you see it now, and I have plenty of beer nerd friends that are this way, that have just deep cellars with hundreds upon hundreds and hundreds of bottles. And, you get to a point where, as with anyone who hoards anything, it starts to choke you off, and it starts to be less fun, and it starts to be a burden rather than a joy. And at that point, then you see people flip to the opposite, and they go full on Marie Kondo and just, if it's not bringing you joy, just, get rid of it. And so, you're just giving these bottles away, trading these bottles. And so, there's that kind of that stash and then the crash mentality that kind of comes with that hoarding. I do think you're right. It's probably a more interesting place for some of those beers are always going to exist. And I'm glad that they do exist. I'm glad that those beers exist out there that people want to collect and trade in the same way that there are collectible bourbon and whiskey bottles, and there are collectible, wines that people will hold on to and treasure and pull out for special occasions. But, hundreds upon hundreds of them for beer that's just not going to be that great.
I'm one of those beer geeks.
You are.
I have that cellar, and I feel everybody's pain as far as like, when am I going to drink all these beers? And you're like, I don't know if I have time to get to them, So, but when I look at them, do they still bring me joy? Yeah, this still brings me joy, so I keep them around.
That's good. I got one more question for you. But before we get into that question, I'd like to express our sincere appreciation for the sponsors that made this episode possible. With BSG, you'll bring the world to your brew house. SS Brewtech is committed to advancing brewing equipment design, performance, and quality. For 25 years, G&D Chillers has led the way on custom innovative solutions. And craftbeer.com's mission is to tell the stories behind America's small and independent breweries. Before we go, tell me what craft means to you.
What does craft mean to me?
What does craft mean to you?
Oh my God, people ask me this all the time.
Seems like a good place to close.
It really does. What craft brewing or craft itself? So to me, the idea to me behind craft brewing is trying to walking in the door every day to your brewery and trying to make better beer, and that is your MO every single day, is trying to make better beer. And so if you're making a craft lager, or if you're making a 20% Belgian quad aged in rum barrels, it's the same concept, which is your passion is to walk through your doors of your brewery and to make better beer every single day, and never stop having that kind of drive and motivation to making it happen. Never letting your beer just become a widget. And I think that if you look at it as your beers are alive, and they should be changing for the better. And if you take that kind of attitude, then that's craft to me. That's craft to me.
How has your approach to craft, now, that's certainly not necessarily the definition that some others in the market put out there for it. How do you find your place and make that argument for craft for Avery?
Well, we live it every day. That is, beer first, that's what we talk about. Beer first, the rest will follow. We do that every single day. I'm lucky to walk through the doors and be surrounded by people who are trying to make the best beer they possibly can. And then we have a great tap room that's, it's not beer, it's beer experience as well. So like, how can we educate our consumers and our fans when they come in here and give them the best experience possible? And then that education that our sales team is giving out, in the States, talking about, how we make our beer. There's I mean, we could spend a whole nother podcast talking about, independent this, independent, what is craft and things like that. But, yeah, I mean,
let's just drink a beer instead.
Well, I think in the end, that's what everybody's going to do anyway. Yeah.
Adam Avery, thanks for joining me on the Craft Beer and Brewing Podcast.
Jamie, thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
Well, everyone's gearing up for CBC, and I'm sure you got a whole bunch of things going on next week too. Hopefully, folks that are coming into town get to come up and check out this beautiful brewery that you've built up here in Boulder, Colorado.
Open invitation to everybody that's listening. We'll have a lot of brewers up here, so maybe you'll run into some famous people. At the very least, you'll be able to drink some beers.
Famous people.
Yeah. Ooh. Maybe. We might have some people here that might surprise you.
Well, all right. Well, cheers, Adam. Thank you so much.
All right, cheers.
Catch us next week for another episode. Like I said, it's going to be a podcast takeover with Neil Fisher and Corey King. If you enjoyed what you hear, or if you want to send me some feedback, just send me an email, jbogner@beerandbrewing.com. Hope you subscribe, support our magazine. We'll be back next week with another episode. Cheers. This podcast is brought to you by Craft Beer and Brewing Magazine for those that love to make and drink great beer. Learn more online or subscribe at beerandbrewing.com or find us on social media @craftbeerbrew.